The night Evelyn Hart sold herself to save her family, she thought she knew exactly what kind of hell waited for her in those mountains. A desperate arrangement, a stranger's bed, the slow death of every dream she'd ever dared to hold. She was wrong about all of it. What she found beyond that frozen pass would shatter everything she believed about survival, power, and the brutal price of freedom. This is her story, raw, unforgiving, and nothing like the fairy tales they tell you. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Hit that like button and let's begin. The bank notice arrived on a Tuesday. Evelyn Hart stood in the doorway of their cabin, wind cutting through her worn cotton dress, staring at the paper like it might suddenly combust in her hands. 14 days to settle accounts or face seizure of property and assets. 14 days. 2 weeks to produce money that didn't exist, had never existed, would never exist, unless she performed some kind of miracle her father's God had apparently decided they didn't deserve. She crumpled the notice and shoved it into her apron pocket before her siblings could see. Inside the cabin, 10-year-old Samuel was trying to make breakfast from the last handful of cornmeal while 8-year-old Margaret coughed into a rag that had seen too many washings. Their father lay in the back room, each breath a wet rattle that spoke of lungs destroyed by silver dust and company negligence. Evelyn had stopped praying 3 months ago, right around the time the mind doctor told her father he had maybe half a year left. Prayers were for people who had the luxury of hope. She dealt in harder currencies now, work, worry, and the arithmetic of survival that never quite added up no matter how many times she ran the numbers. Black Hollow was dying the way frontier towns died, slowly, then all at once. The silver vein had played out 2 years back, and the mining company had pulled up stakes so fast you'd think the mountain was on fire. What remained was a collection of weathered buildings, desperate people, and creditors from Denver who descended like vultures whenever someone got weak enough to pick apart. Her family was weak enough. Evie? Samuel looked up from the stove, his face smudged with ash. Is Papa worse? Papa's fine, she lied, smooth as anything. She'd gotten good at lying. Did you remember to check the snares this morning? Nothing in them, again. Of course not. Every family in Black Hollow was running snares, and there were only so many rabbits to go around. The forest had been picked clean, same as the mountain, same as their futures. Evelyn moved to the stove and took over breakfast preparations, stretching the cornmeal with water until it resembled something almost edible. Margaret watched with hollow eyes that had seen too much for 8 years on this earth. Are the men coming back today? Margaret asked quietly. The men. She meant the creditors, the bank agents, the well-dressed parasites who showed up twice a week now to catalog everything the Hart family owned and calculate its value against impossible debt. Maybe, Evelyn said. Don't worry about them. I heard Mr. Hutchins tell Mrs. McCready that we'd be out by Christmas. Mr. Hutchins should mind his own damn business. Samuel's eyes went wide. Evelyn never swore in front of the children. That's how she knew things had gotten bad. The careful walls she'd built around her anger were starting to crack. She served breakfast in silence. The portions were smaller than yesterday, which had been smaller than the day before. Samuel ate without complaint. Margaret pushed the mush around her bowl, coughing occasionally, each sound like a nail in Evelyn's heart. When their father called out from the back room, Evelyn went to him with a cup of water and the last of the laudanum the doctor had left before stopping his visits. Credit only stretched so far, apparently. Even mercy had a price ceiling. Evie girl, her father's voice was barely a whisper. I heard you talking to the children. Don't waste your breath, Papa. I'm dying anyway. He managed something between a laugh and a cough. Might as well use what's left for something useful. She helped him drink, supporting his head with practiced gentleness. He'd been a big man once, all muscle and stubborn pride. Now he felt like kindling in her hands. I got a letter from your mother's sister in St. Louis, he said, when he could speak again. She says she could take the children, just for a while, until things settle. Things aren't going to settle, Papa. I know. His eyes found hers, and for just a moment she saw the man he used to be. That's why I'm saying you should let them go. Get them somewhere safe before— No. The word came out harder than she intended. We're not splitting up this family. That's not how we survive. Then how do we survive, Evelyn? She had no answer for that. The silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither of them wanted to say. Eventually, she helped him lie back down and returned to the main room where Samuel was trying to teach Margaret her letters with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of wood. The knock came just after noon. Evelyn answered it, expecting creditors, but instead found Mrs. Macready from the boarding house, her face pinched with cold and something that might have been concern. "There's a man asking about your family," Mrs. Macready said without preamble. "Stranger. Showed up this morning asking who in Black Hollow needed help the most desperate." "What kind of help?" "Didn't say exactly, but he's got money, Evie, real money, the kind that doesn't come from around here." Every instinct Evelyn had screamed trap. Men with real money didn't show up in dying towns asking who needed help. They showed up to extract whatever value remained and move on. "Where is he?" "Boarding house. Told him I'd fetch you if you were interested." Interested. As if she had the luxury of choice. As if desperation hadn't already made the decision for her. "Watch the children," Evelyn told Samuel. "I'll be back soon." She followed Mrs. Macready through streets that were more mud than road, now that the mining company had stopped maintaining anything. Black Hollow looked worse every time she really looked at it. Buildings sagging, windows broken, the general store's shelves picked nearly bare. The boarding house sat at the edge of town, a two-story structure that had seen better days and knew it. Mrs. Macready led her to the common room where a man sat alone at a corner table, nursing coffee and watching the street through dirty windows. He looked wrong for Black Hollow. Not because of his clothes, though the leather coat and worn boots spoke of someone who spent serious time in rough country. Not because of his size, though he was broad-shouldered enough to make the chair look fragile underneath him. It was something in the way he held himself, a kind of coiled stillness that suggested violence was always an option, just not currently necessary. When he turned to look at her, Evelyn felt her breath catch. His face was weathered, probably mid-30s, with dark hair and darker eyes that seemed to catalog everything about her in a single glance. "Miss Hart." His voice was low, rough around the edges. "Thank you for coming. Mrs. Macready said you were asking about my family." "Sit down." It wasn't quite an order, but it wasn't a request either. Evelyn remained standing. One corner of his mouth twitched. "Stubborn. Good. You'll need that." "What do you want?" "To make you an offer." He gestured at the empty chair. "Please. This will go easier if we're both sitting." Against her better judgment, Evelyn sat. Mrs. Macready had disappeared, probably to spread gossip about this meeting before it even finished. The stranger pulled a leather wallet from inside his coat and placed it on the table between them. When he opened it, Evelyn saw more cash than she'd ever seen in one place. "My name is Gideon Vale," he said, "and I'm looking for a wife." The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Evelyn felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd heard stories about men from the territories who bought wives the way other people bought livestock. Desperate women, mail-order arrangements, situations that ended badly more often than not. "I'm not interested," she said, already starting to rise. "Your father owes the Merchants Bank of Denver $473, Gideon continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Plus interest. Plus penalties for missed payments. The cabin you're living in has been mortgaged 3 times. Your family has approximately 12 days before seizure proceedings begin." Evelyn froze halfway out of her chair. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know things." He met her eyes with an expression that gave away nothing. "I also know your father's dying, that your siblings are hungry, that you've been selling everything that isn't nailed down trying to keep everyone alive. If you're here to mock me, I'm here to solve your problem." He pushed the wallet closer. "Marry me. Let me pay your debts, secure your family's property, and make sure your siblings are provided for. In exchange, you come with me and play the role of wife for as long as necessary." "Play the role?" Evelyn's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "What exactly does that mean?" "It means a legal marriage. It means you live in my home and present yourself as my wife to anyone who asks. What it doesn't mean," he paused, making sure she was listening, "is anything you don't explicitly agree to. I'm not buying a whore, Miss Hart. I'm hiring someone for a job that requires a wife, and you happen to fit the requirements." "What requirements?" "You're strong. You're clever. You're desperate enough to actually go through with this, but proud enough that you won't just roll over once you're away from Black Hollow." He said it like he was reading a list. And you're not impressed by money or status, which means you won't fold the first time someone tests you. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. Gideon leaned back in his chair. I know you've been running your family since your mother died. I know you worked double shifts at the company store until it closed. I know you tried to get work in the stamp mill and they turned you away because women apparently can't handle machinery, even though half the men they hired couldn't count past 10. He'd done his research. That should have been comforting, proof this wasn't just some random impulse. Instead, it made her skin crawl. Why me? She asked. Why not some widow in Denver who actually wants to get married? Because women in Denver want things I can't give them. His expression darkened. And because I need someone who understands what it means to survive when everything's stacked against you. That's cryptic as hell. It's honest. They stared at each other across the table. Outside, wind rattled the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal sounds in a world that had stopped being normal the moment Gideon Vale walked into it. How long? Evelyn asked. How long would this arrangement last? Depends. Could be a year. Could be longer. And after that? After that, you walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else. Your siblings get education, opportunities, futures that don't involve dying in mines or marrying the first man who can afford to feed them. It sounded too good. Nothing in Evelyn's life had ever been too good, which meant there had to be a catch somewhere in the fine print. What aren't you telling me? She asked. Gideon smiled for the first time, and it wasn't a particularly friendly expression. Plenty, but nothing that'll put you in danger if you follow my lead. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. He stood collecting his wallet. Think about it. You've got until tomorrow at sunrise. After that, I'm leaving Black Hollow either way. And if I say no, then you say no. Your family loses the cabin, your father dies in some charity ward, and your siblings end up wherever the territory decides to put orphans these days. He said it without malice, just stating facts. But at least you'll have your pride intact. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Miss Hart, I'm not a good man, but I keep my word, and I protect what's mine. If you agree to this, your family will never want for anything again. That's a better deal than most people in your position ever get. Then he was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in the common room with the ghost of an offer she couldn't afford to refuse. She sat there for a long time, watching dust motes drift through weak sunlight, trying to figure out which version of hell she was choosing between. When she returned home, Samuel was waiting with news that their father had gotten worse. The coughing had turned bloody, and Margaret was in the back room holding his hand while he struggled to breathe. Evelyn spent the afternoon doing the arithmetic of impossible choices. She could say no to Gideon Vale, watch her family disintegrate, and maintain the fiction that she still had control over her own life. Or she could say yes, trade herself for their survival, and live with whatever consequences came from marrying a stranger who admitted he wasn't a good man. Not much of a choice, really. That night, after the children were asleep, and her father had finally stopped coughing long enough to rest, Evelyn sat by the dying fire and let herself cry. Not much, just enough to bleed off the pressure before it cracked something essential inside her. Then she dried her eyes, squared her shoulders, and made her decision. At sunrise, she found Gideon Vale preparing his wagon outside the boarding house. The sky was the color of old bruises, and snow had started falling overnight. Winter was coming early this year. Another thing to survive, if she lived long enough. I have conditions, Evelyn said instead of good morning. Gideon looked up from checking his horses. If he was surprised to see her, it didn't show. Let's hear them. My siblings stay in the cabin. You pay off all debts and set up an account they can draw from for expenses. Medical care for my father until he dies, and a proper burial after. Done. I want it in writing, legal documents, witnessed by someone who isn't on your payroll. Fair enough. And if I decide to leave, you don't stop me, no matter what. Something flickered across Gideon's face too fast to read. Agreed. Anything else? Yeah. Evelyn met his eyes without flinching. Tell me your real name. I did. Gideon Vale. That's the name you're using. What's the name you were born with? For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Evelyn wondered if she'd pushed too hard too fast. Then he smiled. Genuine this time, startled into something almost like respect. Smart girl. He offered his hand. We'll get along fine, Mrs. Vale. She didn't take his hand. Not yet. I'm not doing this because I want to, she said. I'm doing this because you've backed me into a corner where it's the only option that doesn't end with my family destroyed. I know. I'll hate you for it. Probably. He kept his hand extended. Doesn't change the deal. Evelyn looked at his hand. Rough palm, calluses in places that spoke of hard work and harder living. A working man's hand which didn't match the money in his wallet or the educated way he spoke when he forgot to roughen his vowels. She took his hand and shook it once, firmly. When do we leave? Soon as I finish the paperwork. Few hours, maybe. He released her hand and gestured toward the wagon. Anything you need to bring? Not much worth taking. Bring it anyway. Where we're going, you'll want pieces of who you were before. That sounded ominous. Evelyn decided not to ask what he meant. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity that felt surreal around the edges. Lawyers appeared from somewhere with documents that Evelyn read 3 times before signing. Bank agents showed up looking confused and slightly offended that someone was actually settling the Hart family debt in full. Mrs. McCready spread gossip faster than wildfire. By noon, the entire town knew that Evelyn Hart had sold herself to a stranger for her family's survival. Most people looked at her with pity. A few looked at her with judgment, like she'd done something shameful instead of what she had to do. Evelyn ignored all of them. She said goodbye to her siblings in the cabin that would remain theirs now, bought and paid for by a man whose real name she still didn't know. Samuel cried. Margaret clung to her with surprising strength. Their father was unconscious, which was probably a mercy. I'll write, Evelyn promised, wondering if it was true. And I'll come back when I can. What if he's mean to you? Margaret whispered. Then I'll leave. Another promise she hoped she could keep. I'm not staying anywhere. I'm not wanted. Samuel wiped his eyes. You're the bravest person I know. Brave. The word sat wrong. Brave was charging into danger by choice. This was just survival with extra steps. But she smiled for him anyway, hugged them both hard enough to hurt, and left before the crying could start again. Gideon was waiting by the wagon. He'd changed into fresh clothes, still rough frontier wear, but cleaner. Several parcels had been loaded into the wagon bed, supplies for a journey Evelyn knew nothing about. Ready? He asked. No, she thought, not even close. Yes, she said. He helped her into the wagon with impersonal courtesy, like she was cargo to be secured rather than a person he'd just legally married. The ceremony had been fast and joyless, conducted by a traveling preacher who'd asked no questions as long as the fee was paid. Evelyn Hart was now Evelyn Vale. The name felt foreign in her mouth. They left Black Hollow as snow began falling in earnest. Evelyn looked back once, watching the town disappear into white haze, and wondered if she'd ever see it again. Probably not. Most people who left Black Hollow never came back. For the first hour, they traveled in silence. The wagon rolled north toward higher country, following a road that got progressively worse with each passing mile. Gideon drove with the easy competence of someone who'd spent serious time on rough trails. Finally, Evelyn's curiosity won over her resentment. Where exactly are we going? Into the mountains. That's not an answer. It's the answer you're getting for now. He glanced at her. Cold? She was freezing, but admitting it felt like weakness. I'm fine. Gideon made a sound that might have been amusement. He reached behind the seat and pulled out a heavy wool blanket, passing it to her without comment. Evelyn wrapped herself in it, hating that she needed the warmth, hating that he'd anticipated the need. You do this often? She asked. Find desperate women and make them offers they can't refuse? First time, actually. Lucky me. Could be. He navigated around a fallen branch. Could also be lucky for me. Won't know until we see how it plays out. And if it doesn't play out well, then we both deal with the consequences like adults. Adults. Evelyn had been dealing with adult consequences since she was 14 and her mother died. She was tired of it. They climbed higher into country that got wilder with each mile. Trees crowded closer to the road. Snow lay thick on branches, occasionally dumping in sudden avalanches when wind hit right. Once, Evelyn saw wolf tracks crossing their path. Gideon noticed her looking. Wolves won't bother us, he said. Not unless we're stupid about it. You ever been stupid about it? Once. Long time ago. He pulled his coat tighter. Learned my lesson. Night fell fast in the mountains. Gideon found a sheltered spot and made camp with the efficiency of long practice. He built a fire, set up a lean-to, and produced food from somewhere in the wagon supplies. Evelyn helped where she could, following his terse instructions. They ate in silence. Salt pork, hardtack, coffee so strong it could strip paint. When she curled up in her blankets by the fire, Gideon took first watch without being asked. "Get some sleep," he said. "Long day tomorrow." "They're all long days now." Fair point. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came slowly. Evelyn lay watching fire shadows dance across canvas, listening to Gideon moving around the camp's perimeter, checking things she couldn't see. Eventually her eyes closed. She woke once in the deep night to find him sitting by the fire, methodically cleaning a rifle she hadn't known he had. The firelight caught his face at an angle that made him look older, harder, like a man who'd seen things worth protecting against. "Go back to sleep," he said without looking at her. Evelyn did, and dreamed of wolves with human eyes. 3 days they traveled through increasingly wild country. The road degraded into barely a trail. Settlements disappeared entirely. The only signs of human presence were occasional trappers' cabins, abandoned and rotting. Gideon remained mostly silent, speaking only when necessary. Evelyn learned to read his moods by small signs: the set of his shoulders, the way his eyes tracked movement in the trees, the times he checked his rifle. On the 4th morning, they crossed a pass between 2 peaks, and Gideon finally spoke more than 3 words at once. "Almost there." Evelyn looked around at endless forest and snow-covered mountains. "There's nothing here." "Look closer." She did. At first she saw only wilderness. Then her eyes adjusted and she caught glimpses of something else. A road, maintained and deliberately hidden. Cut lumber, stacked and weathering. A marker stone, placed with intention. "What is this place?" she asked. "My home." "That's still not an answer." Gideon's mouth twitched. "You'll see." They descended into a valley that shouldn't have been there, hidden so completely by the surrounding peaks that you could ride within a mile and never know it existed. And there, spread across the valley floor, like something from a fever dream, was a settlement bigger than Black Hollow had ever been. Evelyn's breath stopped. At the center stood a massive timber lodge, 3 stories of dark wood and stone chimneys. Surrounding it, barns, mills, workers' housing, roads, fences, all of it maintained and clearly prosperous. People moved through the settlement going about their business. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. Horses grazed in corrals. The sounds of industry echoed across the valley. Saws, hammers, voices calling to each other. This wasn't a frontier homestead. This was an empire. "Welcome to Ironcrest," Gideon said quietly. Before Evelyn could process that, riders appeared from the main lodge. They approached at a gallop, and Evelyn saw they were armed, rifles in saddle scabbards, revolvers on hips. Security, professional security. The riders pulled up alongside the wagon, their horses snorting and stamping. The lead rider, a gray-haired man with a scarred face, grinned at Gideon. "About damn time, Mr. Blackthorn. The board's been climbing the walls." Blackthorn, not Vale. Evelyn turned to look at Gideon, at the man she'd married knowing nothing about him, and found him watching her with an expression that might have been apologetic if he were the apologizing type. "Evelyn," he said, "there's some things we need to talk about." Before she could respond, more people appeared. Servants in actual uniforms, men in business suits, a woman who carried herself like she owned the ground she walked on. They all called him Blackthorn. They all treated him like someone important, and they all looked at Evelyn like she was a problem they hadn't anticipated solving. Gideon climbed down from the wagon and offered his hand to help Evelyn descend. When her feet hit solid ground, she felt the world tilt sideways. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. She'd married a drifter to save her family. Except she hadn't. She'd married someone else entirely, and she had no idea what that meant. The Great Lodge's interior smelled of wood smoke, leather, and old money. Evelyn stood in the entrance hall trying not to gawk like a tourist, while servants moved past carrying her meager belongings like they were something precious instead of the worn-out remnants of a dying town. The gray-haired rider from earlier, introduced as Marcus, head of security, had disappeared into some back office. The business-suited men had scattered like birds after Gideon dismissed them with a gesture. Only the woman remained, standing near a massive stone fireplace with her arms crossed and her expression somewhere between annoyed and calculating. "So this is her," the woman said. Not a question. Gideon shrugged off his coat and handed it to a young man who'd appeared from nowhere. "Evelyn, this is Catherine Reeves. She manages the household operations." Catherine's gaze traveled over Evelyn like she was livestock at auction. "She's very—" She paused, searching for a word that wouldn't be outright insulting. "Rural." "She's standing right here," Evelyn said. "And she can speak for herself." Something that might have been amusement crossed Catherine's face. "Well, at least she has a spine." Gideon moved to the fireplace, warming his hands. His whole demeanor had changed since they'd entered the valley. The rough mountain drifter was gone, replaced by someone who moved through this space like he owned it, which Evelyn was beginning to realize he probably did. "Give us the room," Gideon said to Catherine. "The board wants to meet her. They've been waiting." "They can wait longer." His tone didn't change, but something in it made Catherine's mouth thin into a line. "Of course, Mr. Blackthorne," she nodded to Evelyn with professional coldness. "Welcome to Ironcrest, Mrs. Blackthorne." The name hit Evelyn like a slap. Mrs. Blackthorne, not Vale. She'd signed papers under a false name, married a man who didn't exist, and apparently no one here thought that was worth mentioning. Once Catherine left, closing the heavy doors behind her, silence filled the hall. Evelyn counted to 10, then 20, waiting for Gideon to speak first. When he didn't, she stopped waiting. "You want to explain what the hell is happening?" Gideon turned from the fire. "Which part?" "All of it, starting with why everyone here calls you Blackthorne instead of Vale." "Vale's my middle name. Easier to use when I don't want to be recognized." "Recognized as what?" "As Gideon Blackthorne, owner of the largest independent timber operation in 3 territories. He said it flatly, like he was reading a grocery list. "Which makes me a target for every social climber, fortune hunter, and business shark between here and San Francisco." Evelyn felt something cold settle in her chest. "So you lied." "I omitted specifics." "That's the same thing." "No, it's not." He moved closer, and Evelyn had to resist the urge to back up. "I told you I was offering you a job that required a wife. I told you there were things I wasn't telling you. I never lied about what the arrangement was. You let me think you were nobody. I am nobody. Just nobody with money attached." His expression hardened. "The money's why I had to find someone who didn't know what they were getting into. Every woman in Denver society has spent the last 5 years trying to trap me into marriage. Mothers throwing daughters at me. Investors offering business deals with wives as part of the package. I needed someone real. Someone who wouldn't fold the first time things got complicated." "Complicated?" Evelyn's laugh was sharp. "You mean like finding out my husband isn't who he said he was?" "Your husband is exactly who he said he was. I just have more money than you expected." "That's not—" She stopped, frustrated. He was twisting everything, making it sound reasonable when nothing about this was reasonable. "You should have told me." "Why? Would it have changed your answer?" The question sat between them like a landmine. Evelyn wanted to say yes, wanted to claim she had principles that money couldn't buy. But they both knew the truth. Her family's debt hadn't cared about principles. Starvation didn't negotiate with pride. "No," she admitted, "it wouldn't have changed anything." "Then why does it matter now?" "Because—" She searched for words that wouldn't sound stupid. "Because I need to know what I'm walking into. You said this was a job. What's the job actually entail?" Gideon studied her for a long moment. Then he walked to a sideboard, poured 2 glasses of something amber, and offered her one. Evelyn took it. The liquor burned going down, but it was good burn, the kind that came from quality instead of desperation. "The Blackthorne Company was started by my grandfather," Gideon began. "He built it from nothing, and when he died, it went to my father, who proceeded to drink himself to death while making terrible decisions. By the time I inherited, we were months from bankruptcy." "You don't look bankrupt now." "I'm not. Spent the last 8 years rebuilding everything my father destroyed, bought back controlling interest from investors who thought they could carve us up for parts, modernized operations, treated workers like humans instead of equipment. He swirled his drink. Made a lot of money and a lot of enemies doing it. What kind of enemies? The kind who think timber rights should be seized fast and forests stripped bare. The kind who see workers as expendable and safety regulations as profit losses. His voice went flat. And the kind who've spent years trying to force me into marriages that would give them control of the company. Evelyn was starting to understand. So you found someone they couldn't control, someone they'd underestimate. Gideon met her eyes. Someone smart enough to survive what's coming, but unknown enough that they won't see you as a threat until it's too late. What's coming? Scrutiny, tests, people trying to break you so they can get to me. He finished his drink. My Aunt Victoria arrives tomorrow with half the board of directors. They're going to eat you alive if you let them. Cheerful. I don't deal in cheerful, I deal in honest. He set his glass down. You want to walk away? Now's the time. I'll pay your family's debts, set them up with income, honor everything I promised. But if you stay, you need to understand what you're signing up for. Evelyn looked around the hall. Rich wood paneling, expensive rugs, paintings that probably cost more than her entire town. This was wealth on a scale she'd never imagined, and somewhere in this building was a group of people who'd already decided she didn't belong here. They were probably right, but Evelyn had spent her whole life being told she didn't belong places. Mine offices, company stores, anywhere that required money or status or the right last name. She'd gotten used to proving people wrong. I'm not walking away, she said. You sure? No, but I'm staying anyway. Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Not quite approval, but close. Then we need to get a few things straight. First, in public, we're married. Newlyweds, actually happy. All the usual performance. And in private? In private, we're business partners. He gestured at the hallway leading deeper into the lodge. You'll have your own rooms, your own space. I'm not expecting anything beyond what we agreed to. Which was what exactly? Because the specifics are getting blurry. Be my wife when it matters. Stand beside me when people are watching. Don't fold when they test you. He paused. And trust that I'm not trying to hurt you. That's asking a lot from someone you lied to. I know. He picked up her glass, refilled it, handed it back. But it's what I'm asking anyway. A door opened somewhere in the building. Voices echoed down a hallway, the sound of footsteps approaching. That'll be Catherine with your quarters ready, Gideon said. Get settled. Rest. Tomorrow's going to be rough. How rough? Victoria Blackthorne makes grizzly bears look cuddly. His smile was grim. And she's going to hate you on sight. Catherine appeared in the doorway. Your rooms are prepared, Mrs. Blackthorne. Evelyn followed her through hallways that seemed designed to intimidate. Every surface gleamed. Every painting looked expensive. Every piece of furniture screamed old money and older traditions. They climbed a wide staircase to the second floor. Catherine walked with perfect posture, her heels clicking against hardwood like punctuation marks. Mr. Blackthorne's quarters are in the east wing, Catherine said without looking back. Yours are here in the west. The arrangement should provide adequate privacy. Adequate, Evelyn repeated. Yes. Catherine stopped at a heavy oak door. I've taken the liberty of arranging appropriate clothing. Your current wardrobe is, she paused delicately, insufficient for your new position. Evelyn looked down at her worn dress, the same one she'd been wearing for 4 days of travel. Kept me alive this long. Yes, well, survival and society operate under different rules. Catherine opened the door. I'll send someone to help you dress for dinner. The room beyond was larger than the entire cabin Evelyn had grown up in. A 4-poster bed dominated one wall. A fireplace crackled opposite. Windows overlooked the valley, showing the settlement spread below like a miniature city. Evelyn's few possessions looked pathetic sitting on a chair by the wardrobe. Dinner is at 7, Catherine continued. The board members who've already arrived will be in attendance. I suggest you... She eyed Evelyn critically. Prepare accordingly. Then she was gone, leaving Evelyn alone in more luxury than she knew what to do with. She explored the room slowly. The bed was soft enough to drown in. The wardrobe held dresses she'd never have chosen. Elegant, expensive, completely foreign. A vanity held more cosmetics and hair supplies than she'd owned in her entire life. A door led to a private bathing room with actual running water. Evelyn stared at the porcelain tub for a full minute before the absurdity hit her. Yesterday she'd been washing with freezing water from a shared well. Today she had her own bathroom with hot water on demand. The laugh that escaped was half hysterical. She ran a bath because she could, because the hot water seemed like magic, because her body ached from days in a wagon, and she might as well take advantage of one good thing before everything went to hell. The water was perfect. She sank into it and let 4 days of dirt and fear dissolve. For just a moment, she let herself stop thinking about marriages and lies and board members who wanted to eat her alive. Then the moment passed and reality came crashing back. She dried off and examined the wardrobe Catherine had mentioned. The dresses were beautiful in a way that made Evelyn's teeth ache. Silk and velvet and fabric she couldn't name. All of them cut for someone who knew how to move in expensive clothes, someone who wasn't her. A knock interrupted her inspection. A young woman entered without waiting for permission. She was maybe 18 with dark hair and a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm here to help you dress for dinner." "I can dress myself." "Of course, ma'am." The girl moved to the wardrobe with practiced efficiency. But Catherine insists on proper presentation for the board. Translation: Evelyn couldn't be trusted to look acceptable on her own. She swallowed her pride and let the girl work. The process involved more undergarments than seemed strictly necessary. A corset that made breathing an adventure, and finally a deep green dress that probably cost more than 6 months of her father's mine wages. The girl did something complicated with Evelyn's hair, pinning it up in a style that felt precarious but apparently looked appropriate. When she finally looked in the mirror, Evelyn barely recognized herself. "You look lovely, ma'am," the girl said with mechanical politeness. Lovely. Like a doll dressed up for display. "Thank you," Evelyn managed. "I'll show you to the dining room." They descended the stairs in silence. The girl led her through more hallways until they reached a set of double doors. Voices filtered through, men's voices mostly, discussing timber prices and transport contracts. The girl opened the doors and announced, "Mrs. Blackthorne." Every conversation stopped. Evelyn walked into a dining room that looked like it belonged in a palace. A long table dominated the center, already set with crystal and silver. A dozen people stood around holding drinks and looking at her like she'd just crawled out of a mine shaft. Gideon was there, cleaned up and wearing clothes that fit his wealth instead of hiding it. He looked different, more polished, more dangerous somehow. Next to him stood a woman in her 50s wearing enough jewelry to fund a small army. Her eyes locked onto Evelyn with predatory interest. "Aunt Victoria," Gideon said smoothly. "Let me introduce my wife, Evelyn." Victoria's smile could have frozen water. How absolutely charming. Gideon's been so secretive about his sudden marriage. She approached with the grace of a hunting cat. "Tell me, dear, where exactly did you two meet?" "Black Hollow," Evelyn said. "Black Hollow." Victoria repeated it like she was tasting something foul. "I'm not familiar with it." "Most people aren't. Mining town, played out about 2 years back." "I see." Victoria's gaze traveled over Evelyn's dress, her hair, her everything. "And your family? What do they do?" The trap was obvious. Evelyn could feel everyone waiting for her to say something that would confirm their assumptions about gold-digging frontier trash. "My father was a miner," she said clearly. "My mother died when I was 14. I've got 2 younger siblings I'm supporting." Silence fell like snow. Victoria's smile sharpened. "How very industrious of you." Someone had to be. One of the men, old, expensively dressed, radiating disapproval, cleared his throat. "Mr. Blackthorne, perhaps we should discuss the ramifications of this sudden union. The board has concerns." "The board can voice those concerns after dinner," Gideon said. His tone was pleasant, but something in it made the old man's mouth snap shut. They sat for dinner in an arrangement that felt deliberately hostile. Victoria positioned herself directly across from Evelyn, with board members flanking both sides like artillery. The meal was excessive. Course after course of food Evelyn barely recognized. She watched the others to figure out which fork to use, trying not to look as lost as she felt. Victoria dominated conversation with practiced ease, discussing Denver society and business matters while making subtle digs that kept landing on Evelyn like paper cuts. "The governor's reception is in 2 weeks," Victoria mentioned casually. Such an important event. All the territory's most influential families will attend. She paused delicately. I assume you've attended formal receptions before, Evelyn? No? Oh. Victoria's eyebrows rose with theatrical surprise. Well, I suppose there's a first time for everything. Across the table, Gideon's expression didn't change, but Evelyn saw his hand tighten on his wine glass. The reception is critical for maintaining business relationships, one of the board members added, particularly given the recent negotiations with Eastern investors. Which is why appropriate representation is essential, Victoria agreed. One can't afford embarrassment at such events. The meaning was clear as crystal. Evelyn was the embarrassment waiting to happen. She took a sip of wine and met Victoria's eyes. I'm sure I'll manage. Of course you will, dear. Victoria's tone dripped with condescension. With proper guidance and instruction, even the most inexperienced person can learn basic social graces. I wasn't aware social graces included insulting your host's wife over dinner. The table went dead silent. Victoria's smile froze. Several board members suddenly found their plates fascinating. Gideon, damn him, almost looked amused. My dear, Victoria recovered smoothly. I meant no insult, simply observation. You must understand that navigating Denver society requires skills quite different from what you're accustomed to. I've navigated starving towns and dying families, Evelyn said. I think I can handle a party. It's hardly the same thing. You're right. One actually matters. Someone choked on their wine. Victoria's face went hard. Perhaps, the old board member interjected desperately, we should discuss the quarterly reports. Mr. Blackthorne, the numbers from after dinner, Gideon said again. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she couldn't read. My wife and I have had a long journey. I'm sure she's tired. It was a rescue. Evelyn wasn't sure if she appreciated it or resented it. The meal dragged on for another hour. Evelyn stayed quiet, listening more than speaking, learning the rhythms of how these people communicated. Every word had three meanings. Every compliment hit a knife. They spoke in codes designed to exclude anyone who wasn't born understanding them. Finally, mercifully, it ended. Gideon stood. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Evelyn, I'll walk you back to your quarters. Before Victoria could object, he'd moved around the table and offered Evelyn his arm. She took it, letting him guide her out of the dining room while conversations exploded behind them. They walked in silence until they were well clear of listening ears. You shouldn't have provoked her, Gideon said quietly. She provoked first. She's testing you, seeing if you'll crack under pressure. Did I pass? He smiled slightly. Victoria's probably planning your destruction right now, so, yes, I'd say you passed. They reached the staircase. Evelyn started to climb, then stopped. This was a mistake, she said. Gideon's expression shifted. You want to leave? I want to understand what the hell you actually expect from me, because standing there while your aunt treats me like garbage isn't something I signed up for. You signed up for being my wife, in name, not in being your punching bag for rich people's entertainment. They won't stop, Gideon said. Victoria's going to push harder. The board's going to demand proof you're suitable, and if you can't handle one dinner, you sure as hell won't survive the governor's reception. Evelyn's temper, already frayed, snapped. Then maybe you should have married someone from your own world instead of dragging me into this. I needed someone they couldn't control, or someone desperate enough to take abuse because the alternative is watching her family starve. The words hung between them, ugly and true. Gideon's jaw tightened. That's exactly what this is. Evelyn started climbing again. Good night, Mr. Blackthorne. She didn't look back. In her room, she struggled out of the expensive dress and left it in a heap. The corset took longer, and by the time she was free of it, her hands were shaking with anger and exhaustion and something that might have been fear. She thought she understood the deal. Marry a stranger, play a role, save her family. Simple transaction. But nothing about this was simple. She crawled into the enormous bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the lodge settle around her. Somewhere below, board members were probably dissecting every word she'd said, every mistake she'd made. Let them. Evelyn had survived worse than rich people's judgment. She'd survive this too, even if it killed her. The next morning started with Catherine appearing before Evelyn was fully awake. carrying a tray of breakfast and an agenda that made Evelyn's head hurt. Etiquette instruction begins at 9, Catherine announced, setting the tray down with clinical precision. Followed by wardrobe consultation, dance lessons, and an introduction to the household staff. Dance lessons. Mrs. Victoria insists. The governor's reception will include a formal ball. Of course it would. Evelyn forced down breakfast while Catherine outlined expectations in exhausting detail. Every moment of her day was scheduled, every activity designed to transform her into someone acceptable. The etiquette lessons were torture. An elderly woman named Mrs. Dresden spent 3 hours explaining which fork was for which course, how to hold a teacup, what topics were appropriate for polite conversation. Posture, Mrs. Dresden snapped when Evelyn slouched. A lady maintains perfect posture at all times. Evelyn straightened, biting back a response about how perfect posture didn't matter when you were carrying water buckets uphill. Wardrobe consultation meant standing while seamstresses measured and pinned and discussed her like she was furniture. They spoke in rapid French, which Evelyn didn't understand but strongly suspected wasn't complimentary. Dance lessons were worse. The instructor, a thin man with no patience, tried teaching her waltzes and quadrilles like her life depended on it, which apparently it did. No, 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 he said for the 100th time. You must follow his lead, not fight it. I'm not fighting. You're treating it like combat. This is supposed to be graceful. Evelyn had never felt less graceful in her life. By evening, every muscle ached and her head pounded with information she'd never need except for impressing people she didn't like. She skipped dinner, claiming exhaustion. Catherine looked disapproving but didn't argue. Alone in her room, Evelyn stared out the window at Ironcrest Valley. Workers moved between buildings. Smoke rose from the mills. Life continued like this was normal, like she belonged here. She didn't belong here. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Gideon entered without waiting for permission. He'd lost the formal clothes from last night, back to rough workwear that suited him better. Catherine says you're refusing dinner. I'm tired. You're hiding. I'm surviving. She turned from the window. Which is what you hired me for, right? Survival? He studied her with those dark eyes that saw too much. Victoria's convinced the board you're a liability. They're meeting tomorrow to discuss options. Options for what? Removing you, he said it bluntly. Annulment, payoff, whatever it takes to end this marriage before it damages the company. Evelyn's stomach dropped. Can they do that? They can try. Gideon moved to the fireplace, warming his hands even though the room wasn't cold. There's a clause in the company charter. Marriage that threatens stability can be challenged by the board. And I'm a threat to stability. You're unknown. They don't like unknown. So what do? We fight. He turns to face her. The governor's reception. You walk in there, prove you can handle yourself. Show them you're not some frontier girl they can intimidate. His expression hardened. You do that, and the board can't touch us. And if I can't? Then they win. The marriage ends. You go back to Black Hollow with enough money to be comfortable, and I spend the next decade fighting off marriage schemes from Victoria's approved candidates. Evelyn sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted. You make it sound easy. Just walk into a room full of people who hate me and somehow win them over. I don't need you to win them over. I need you to not break. There's a difference? Huge difference. Gideon sat in the chair opposite. They're expecting you to fail, expecting you to humiliate yourself and prove Victoria right. So don't give them that. Stand your ground. Be yourself. Let them underestimate you right up until they realize they've already lost. That's a nice speech. Doesn't make it possible. You told Victoria to her face that insulting me wasn't proper social graces. You think that was impossible? Evelyn almost smiled. That was stupid. That was perfect. He leaned forward. You've survived things these people can't imagine. Hunger, watching family die, making choices between bad options and worse ones. You really think a fancy party is going to break you after all that? Fancy parties have different rules. Rules are rules. You learn them, you use them, you win. His voice softened slightly. And I'll help. Whatever you need. Instruction, practice, someone to tell you when Victoria's setting traps. Why? Evelyn asked. Why does this matter so much to you? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm tired, he finally said. tired of fighting alone, tired of people trying to control me through marriage and business and every other angle they can find. I built this company back from nothing, and I'm not letting them tear it apart because they don't like who I chose to stand beside me. You chose me because I was desperate. I chose you because you're strong enough to survive what's coming. He stood. Now prove me right. He left before she could respond. Evelyn sat alone, his words echoing in the quiet room. Strong enough to survive, as if strength was something you could just decide to have instead of something earned through necessity. But maybe that's all strength ever was. Deciding not to break when breaking would be easier. She'd made that decision before. Every time she'd dragged herself through another day in Black Hollow. Every time she'd smiled for her siblings while her own stomach cramped with hunger. Every time she'd chosen survival over surrender. She could make it again. Even here. Even now. Even if it meant walking into a ballroom full of people who wanted to watch her fail. The following days blurred into an exhausting routine of instruction that felt more like military training than preparation for a social event. Evelyn woke before dawn to Catherine's sharp knocking, endured hours of dance practice until her feet bled through her stockings, memorized names and titles and business relationships until her brain felt like it might leak out her ears. Mrs. Dresden drilled her on conversation topics with the enthusiasm of a drill sergeant. Never discuss politics directly. Never mention religion unless someone else raises it first. Never ever talk about money in specific terms. What's left to talk about? Evelyn asked after a particularly brutal session. Weather, art, travel, charitable endeavors. Mrs. Dresden's expression suggested these topics were barely acceptable. The goal is to appear cultured without being controversial. Sounds boring as hell. Language, Mrs. Blackthorne. Evelyn bit her tongue. Hell was the mildest thing she wanted to say. The dance instructor remained perpetually disappointed in her progress. You're still too stiff. Dancing is about trust, about letting your partner guide you. I don't like being guided. That much is obvious. He sighed with theatrical frustration. Try again, and this time stop treating the waltz like a wrestling match. By the 5th day, Evelyn was ready to burn the entire lodge down and walk back to Black Hollow. Pride be damned, debts be damned, the whole arrangement be damned. She'd survived poverty. She could survive it again. Then a letter arrived from Samuel. Catherine brought it during breakfast, looking vaguely disapproving of personal correspondence interrupting the schedule. Evelyn took it to her room and opened it with shaking hands. The writing was Samuel's careful script, each letter formed with the precision of someone still learning. Dear Evie, Papa is doing better. The new doctor says the medicine is helping with the pain. Margaret stopped coughing so much and she ate a whole meal yesterday. Mrs. McCready says we can stay in the cabin as long as we need and nobody's coming to take it anymore. I miss you. Margaret cries sometimes at night, but I tell her you're safe and you'll write when you can. Are you safe? Is your husband good to you? The general store gave us credit, real credit, not the kind where they write it down and never let you forget. Mr. Hutchins came by to apologize for what he said. I told him to go to hell, but Papa made me apologize back. Please write soon. We want to know you're okay. Love, Samuel. Evelyn read it 3 times, her throat tight. They were surviving. More than surviving. They had medicine, food, credit, stability. Everything she'd sold herself to provide. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like being trapped in a bargain she couldn't back out of, even if she wanted to. She wrote back immediately, lying about how wonderful everything was, how kind Gideon was, how excited she was about the governor's reception. The lies came easily. She'd been lying to her siblings about how bad things were for years. This was just a different flavor of protection. That afternoon, Victoria appeared during dance practice with 3 elegantly dressed women in tow. They watched from chairs arranged like a tribunal while Evelyn stumbled through another waltz. Charming, Victoria said when the music stopped. So very earnest. The other women tittered behind gloved hands. The dance instructor looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Blackthorne is making excellent progress. Of course she is. Victoria's smile was sharp. Though I wonder if 2 weeks is enough time to overcome such a significant deficit in training. Perhaps, one of the other women suggested sweetly, it would be wiser to postpone the public introduction until she's more prepared. Translation: hide Evelyn away until she stopped being an embarrassment. Evelyn met Victoria's eyes. I'll be ready. Will you? Victoria stood, gliding forward with predatory grace. The governor's reception isn't some frontier barn dance, dear. One misstep, one breach of etiquette, and you'll humiliate not just yourself, but the entire Blackthorn name. Then I won't misstep. How wonderfully confident. Victoria circled her like a shark. Tell me, what do you know about the governor's political position on territorial expansion, his stance on railroad development, his relationship with the mining consortiums? Evelyn had no idea. The silence stretched. Victoria's smile widened. I see. And when the governor's wife asks about your charitable work, what will you tell her? That you're very experienced in surviving poverty? The other women laughed outright. Aunt Victoria! Gideon's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, and Evelyn couldn't tell how long he'd been there. I didn't realize you were observing the lessons. Simply ensuring my nephew's wife is adequately prepared. Victoria didn't look remotely ashamed. The family's reputation is at stake. The family's reputation survived my father's catastrophic business decisions. I think it can handle Evelyn learning to waltz. He moved into the room, and somehow his presence changed the entire dynamic. Ladies, thank you for visiting. I'm sure you have other engagements. It was a dismissal. Victoria's companions recognized it immediately, gathering their things with hurried politeness. Victoria herself remained a moment longer, her gaze shifting between Gideon and Evelyn with calculating interest. 2 weeks, she said softly. I hope she's ready. She will be. After they left, the dance instructor made a hasty excuse and disappeared. Evelyn stood alone with Gideon in the practice room, her feet aching and her pride bruised. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. He loosened his collar, looking tired. Victoria's trying to break you before the reception, make you doubt yourself enough that you'll fail on your own. It's working. No, it's not. He studied her. You're still here, still trying. That's not broken. I don't know anything about governors or politics or charitable work. She's right. I'm going to humiliate us both. You know about survival, about making hard choices, about standing up when everyone expects you to fall down. Gideon moved closer. That's worth more than knowing which fork to use. Not in their world. Then we'll teach you their world. He offered his hand. Dance with me. Evelyn stared at his hand. I'm terrible at it. So we'll practice until you're not. She took his hand and he pulled her into position. Unlike the dance instructor's clinical grip, Gideon's hold felt solid, grounding. He started humming a waltz, no music needed, and began to lead. At first she was stiff, fighting the movement, but Gideon was patient in a way the instructor hadn't been, adjusting his pace to match her stumbling steps. Stop thinking, he said. Just follow. I don't know how to stop thinking. Then think about something else. What happened in Black Hollow the last time there was a celebration? The question surprised her. Why? Because I want to know, and because you need to stop looking at your feet. Evelyn forced her gaze up. The mine closed on a Saturday. Some of the workers got drunk and started a bonfire in the street. Half the town showed up. Someone had a fiddle. People danced until dawn, even though we all knew it was over. Did you dance? With Samuel. He was 8 and kept stepping on my feet. The memory made her smile despite everything. Margaret sat on Papa's shoulders and tried to catch sparks from the fire. Sounds better than most formal balls I've attended. They turned, and this time Evelyn didn't stumble. You go to a lot of balls? More than I want, less than Victoria thinks I should. He guided her through a spin that actually worked. See? You can do this. Because we're alone. Put me in a room full of people watching and I'll forget everything. Then we'll practice in a room full of people. Before Evelyn could ask what he meant, Gideon called for Catherine. She appeared with her usual efficiency, looking mildly scandalized to find them dancing without supervision. Gather the senior staff, Gideon told her. I want everyone in the main hall in 30 minutes. Catherine's eyebrows rose fractionally. Everyone, sir? Everyone who can spare the time. We're having a practice ball. An hour later, Evelyn stood at the entrance to the main hall wearing one of her new dresses and fighting the urge to run. Inside, 30-some people had assembled. Household staff, senior managers from the mill operations, Marcus and several security personnel who looked deeply uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Catherine had even convinced a few workers to bring instruments. The result was a makeshift orchestra that sounded more enthusiastic than skilled. Gideon stood beside her, also dressed formally. Ready? This is insane. Probably. He offered his arm. But it's better than walking into Denver blind. They entered together. Conversation stopped as people turned to look. Evelyn felt her chest tighten with familiar panic, but Gideon's steady presence kept her moving forward. "Thank you all for coming," he announced. "My wife needs practice navigating formal events, and I need to know who can actually dance well enough to help." He looked around the room. "Catherine, you first." Catherine looked like she'd swallowed a lemon, but she stepped forward with rigid propriety. "It would be my honor, Mr. Blackthorne." They danced a stiff, formal waltz while everyone watched. When it ended, Gideon turned to Evelyn. "Your turn. Choose a partner." Evelyn's mind went blank. Then she saw Marcus trying to blend into the wall, despite being 6 feet of scarred muscle. "Marcus?" she said. He looked terrified. "Ma'am? I haven't danced since my wedding 20 years ago." "Then we'll both be terrible together." That got a few laughs. Marcus approached like he was heading to his execution, but when the music started, he proved better than expected. His hands were gentle despite their size, and he counted steps under his breath to keep time. "You're doing fine, ma'am," he muttered. "Liar." "Only a little." He navigated a turn. "Mr. Blackthorne's right about you. You're tougher than you look." "I don't feel tough." "Nobody does when they're scared. That's when toughness matters most." They finished without Evelyn falling on her face. Light applause followed. Then others started pairing off, and suddenly the practice ball became something almost real. Evelyn danced with a mill foreman who smelled like sawdust and knew exactly 3 steps. With a young clerk who blushed crimson the entire time. With Catherine, who maintained perfect form while whispering corrections about posture. Between dances, people talked to her. Not about politics or charity, but about real things. The foreman's daughter, who was getting married next month. The clerk's mother, who made the best apple pie in the territory. Marcus's wife, who wanted to visit but hated traveling in winter. These were people she understood. Working people. People who knew what it meant to be tired and worried and still show up the next day. "You're smiling," Gideon said when he claimed her for another dance. "They're nice. They're yours." He guided her through the steps with easy confidence. "Everyone in this room will be watching when you go to Denver, and they'll be hoping you show those rich bastards what frontier people are made of." Evelyn hadn't thought about it that way. She'd been so focused on not embarrassing Gideon that she'd missed the bigger picture. These people had stakes in this too. Their jobs, their lives. The company that supported the entire valley. "No pressure," she said dryly. Gideon laughed. "You've handled worse." The practice ball lasted 3 hours. By the end, Evelyn's feet screamed in protest and her face hurt from smiling, but something had shifted. The steps felt more natural. The conversation flowed easier. She could almost imagine doing this for real. Almost. As people began to leave, many stopped to wish her luck or offer encouragement. Marcus gave her an awkward pat on the shoulder. Catherine nodded with something that might have been approval. When the hall finally emptied, Evelyn collapsed into a chair and kicked off her shoes. That was exhausting. That was necessary. Gideon sat across from her. "Now you know you can do it. The faces in Denver will be different, but the principle's the same. The principle being smile and don't fall down? More or less." He poured 2 glasses of whiskey from a decanter someone had left out. "Though in Denver, you'll also need to dodge verbal knives from people who've been sharpening them for years." Cheerful thought. "I don't believe in false optimism." He handed her a glass. "But I do believe in preparation, and you just proved you can handle yourself under pressure." Evelyn sipped the whiskey. It burned less than the first time, or maybe she was getting used to expensive liquor. "Victoria's going to be there, front and center. She hates me. She hates that I chose you instead of one of her approved candidates. That's different." Gideon swirled his drink. "Victoria spent years positioning herself as the matriarch of this family. My father was too drunk to care, so she stepped in, built alliances, made promises, traded favors. She expected to control who I married. But you wouldn't let her." I learned early that giving Victoria an inch means losing a mile. His expression hardened. She'll try everything to break us. Publicly, privately, through the board, through social pressure. The governor's reception is her best chance to prove you're unsuitable. What happens if she succeeds? The board votes to invalidate the marriage. Company charter has provisions for removing threats to stability. He met her eyes. You'd be compensated, handsomely, but the marriage would be over. And you'd be back where you started. Worse, because Victoria would control who I married next, and she'd make sure it was someone who'd give her leverage over the company. Evelyn processed that. So this isn't just about proving I can handle a party. It's about proving Victoria can't control you. Smart girl. Gideon finished his whiskey. Welcome to the real game. The next week passed in intensive preparation. Mrs. Dresden drilled Evelyn on every prominent family expected at the reception. Their business interests, their political leanings, their social connections. It was like memorizing a map of a battlefield. The Hendersons control half the railroad development. The Ashfords have mining interests. The Prescotts are old money with newspaper connections. Mrs. Dresden's voice droned on. Never insult a Prescott, they'll destroy you in print. How do I insult them by accident? By being yourself, dear. That's why we're working so hard to give you better options. The dance lessons intensified. New partners rotated through, Catherine, mill managers, even the cook who proved surprisingly graceful. Gideon joined when he could, stealing hours from business to practice with her. Those sessions were different, more focused. He'd throw hypothetical situations at her while they danced. Governor's wife asks about your education. What do you say? I don't have one. Wrong. You had practical education managing a household and supporting your family. Make it sound intentional. They'd spin through another turn. Someone comments on your dress being last season's style. How do you respond? Tell them to mind their own business? Try, I prefer timeless elegance to trendy excess. Sounds better, means the same thing. It was exhausting, but Evelyn was getting better at the verbal chess game these people played. 3 days before departure to Denver, disaster struck. The seamstress arrived with Evelyn's gown for the reception. She'd been working on it for weeks, creating something that was supposed to transform Evelyn into someone who belonged among territorial elite. When she unwrapped it, Evelyn's stomach dropped. The dress was beautiful, layers of deep blue silk that caught light like water, delicate beading across the bodice, elegant lines that would have looked stunning on someone else, someone taller, someone with different proportions. The seamstress's face went pale. There's been a mistake. The measurements... She trailed off, staring at the dress that was clearly wrong. Catherine appeared like she'd been summoned by catastrophe. One look at the dress, and her expression turned grim. This won't do at all. Can it be fixed? Evelyn asked. Not in 3 days. The seamstress looked ready to cry. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Blackthorne. The measurements I was given were probably sabotaged, Catherine finished coldly. She held up the dress, examining it with professional efficiency. This was cut for someone 4 inches taller and considerably thinner. Evelyn felt sick. Victoria. Almost certainly. Catherine's jaw tightened. She has connections among Denver's seamstresses. It would be simple to arrange an error. The seamstress wrung her hands. I can start over, but without more time. We don't have more time. Evelyn sat down hard. The reception is in 4 days. Silence filled the room. Even Catherine seemed at a loss. Then the door opened and Gideon walked in, took one look at the situation, and swore with impressive creativity. Victoria's work? He asked. Almost certainly, Catherine confirmed. He examined the ruined dress with cold anger. Can you fix it? Not in time, sir. Then we'll find another dress. From where? Evelyn asked. We're days from Denver, and I need something that won't make me look like frontier trash. Gideon was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his expression shifted. My mother's things. They're still in storage. Catherine looked shocked. Sir, those haven't been touched in years. And given Mrs. Blackthorne's different build, my mother was about Evelyn's height, and she had excellent taste. He turned to Catherine. Get the trunks from the east storage room. Everything she wore to formal events. Mr. Blackthorne, are you certain those gowns are... are sitting in a trunk gathering dust while my wife needs a dress. His tone ended the argument. Do it. An hour later, they'd hauled 3 massive trunks to Evelyn's room. Inside were gowns carefully wrapped in tissue paper, rich fabrics in deep colors, styles from 10 years ago, maybe more, but classic enough to still work. Catherine pulled them out one by one while the seamstress examined each. Beautiful, the seamstress breathed. Real craftsmanship. They don't make them like this anymore. Gideon stood by the window, not watching. My mother wore the emerald one to the governor's inaugural ball. She was the most beautiful woman in the room. Something in his voice made Evelyn look at him. Real pain, carefully controlled. How long has she been gone? Evelyn asked quietly. 12 years. Fever took her fast. He finally turned. She would have liked you. She hated false people. The seamstress held up a gown in deep burgundy. This one might work. The proportions are right, and with some alterations. She looked at Evelyn. Try it on. Evelyn stripped down to her undergarments while the seamstress and Catherine helped her into the dress. The fabric was heavy, expensive, real in a way the sabotaged gown hadn't been. When they'd fastened all the buttons, the seamstress stepped back. Well, Catherine said. For once, she sounded impressed. Evelyn looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The dress fit like it had been waiting for her. The color made her skin glow. The cut was flattering without being revealing. This is perfect, the seamstress said. With minor adjustments, it'll be better than anything new I could have made. Gideon crossed to where Evelyn stood. He looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. You look like you belong, he said quietly. In your mother's dress. In your own skin. He touched the fabric at her shoulder, careful. Keep this one. The next 3 days blurred together. Final fittings. Last-minute instructions. Packing for the trip to Denver. The household buzzed with preparation like they were heading to war. Maybe they were. The morning they left, frost covered the valley and the sky threatened snow. Evelyn stood on the lodge's front steps, dressed in traveling clothes and trying not to think about everything that could go wrong. Marcus supervised loading their luggage into the carriage. Catherine issued final instructions to staff. The whole valley seemed to be watching. Gideon appeared at her elbow. Ready? No. Good. Overconfidence gets you killed. He helped her into the carriage. Remember what we practiced. Stand tall. Speak clearly. Don't let them see you sweat. And when Victoria tries to destroy me, fight back. He settled across from her as the carriage began to move. You've survived worse than rich people's opinions. Evelyn watched Ironcrest disappear behind them and tried to believe that was true. The journey to Denver took 2 days. They stopped at roadhouses where Gideon was recognized and Evelyn was examined like a curiosity. Whispers followed them. The frontier girl Blackthorn had married, the nobody from nowhere. Let them whisper. Denver appeared on the horizon like a promise and a threat. Buildings stacked against each other, streets crowded with people. Wealth displayed so casually it made Evelyn's teeth ache. They stayed at a hotel that cost more per night than her family's cabin was worth. Their rooms overlooked the city. Evelyn stood at the window, watching people move through streets below, and felt completely out of place. A knock at the connecting door between her room and Gideon's. Come in. He entered carrying a small box. This arrived while you were settling in. Inside was a necklace. Simple, elegant, clearly expensive. From Victoria, Evelyn guessed. From me. Gideon took it out. My mother wore this to her first major event. She said it gave her courage. I thought you didn't believe in false optimism. I don't. But courage is real. He fastened it around her neck. And so is the fact that you've made it this far. Evelyn touched the necklace. The metal was warm from his hands. Tomorrow night, she said. Tomorrow night, he agreed. And then we'll know. Neither of them said what they'd know. Whether she could survive this world. Whether the marriage would hold. Whether Victoria's trap would spring or fail. Evelyn didn't sleep well that night. She kept thinking about ballrooms full of people who wanted her to fail, about Victoria's sharp smile, about the board members waiting to vote on whether she was suitable. But she also thought about Samuel's letter, about her father getting medicine, about Margaret eating full meals. She'd made this bargain. Now she had to see it through. When morning came, the city was bright and cold. Catherine appeared early to begin preparations. The dress, the hair, the makeup, transforming Evelyn into someone who could walk into that ballroom and not flinch. By evening, she stood in front of the mirror one last time. The woman looking back was a stranger, elegant, composed, every hair in place. The burgundy gown fit perfectly after the seamstress's alterations. Her mother's necklace caught the light. She looked like she belonged. Now she just had to convince everyone else. Gideon knocked and entered. He was dressed formally, all sharp lines and controlled power. When he saw her, something flickered across his face too fast to name. "You'll do," he said. "High praise." "It's honest praise." He offered his arm. "Time to go to war, Mrs. Blackthorne." Evelyn took his arm and let him lead her toward whatever waited. The carriage ride to the governor's mansion felt too short and too long simultaneously. Other carriages crowded the street, all carrying Colorado Territory's wealthiest families toward the same destination. When they pulled up, Evelyn saw the mansion lit like a beacon. Music drifted through open doors. People in expensive clothes climbed the steps like this was normal, like they belonged there. "Stay close," Gideon murmured. "And remember, half these people are terrified they don't belong either. They're just better at hiding it." They stepped out of the carriage into a world Evelyn had never imagined existed, and Victoria was waiting at the top of the steps, smiling like a wolf. Victoria descended the mansion steps with the predatory grace of someone who owned every room she entered. Her gown was black silk that probably cost more than most people earned in a year, and diamonds glittered at her throat like captured stars. "Gideon, darling," she kissed the air near his cheek. "And Evelyn, how unexpected to see you actually attend." "Did you think I'd stay home?" Evelyn asked. "I thought you might come to your senses." Victoria's smile was poison wrapped in lace. "But I suppose desperation makes fools of us all." Gideon's puncheon tightened on Evelyn's arm. A warning or reassurance, she couldn't tell which. "Shall we?" He guided Evelyn past Victoria before she could respond. The mansion's entrance hall was chaos disguised as elegance. Hundreds of people in expensive clothes moved through spaces designed to intimidate. Crystal chandeliers threw light across marble floors. Paintings worth fortunes hung on walls like they were nothing special. Servants glided between guests carrying champagne and small plates of food that looked too pretty to eat. Evelyn's first instinct was to turn around and run. Her second was to lift her chin and walk forward like she belonged there. She chose the second. Mr. Blackthorne. A portly man with magnificent whiskers intercepted them. "I heard rumors you'd married, but I hardly believed them until this moment." "Senator Cartwright." Gideon shook his hand. "May I present my wife, Evelyn?" Cartwright's gaze swept over her with the thoroughness of a property assessor. "Enchanted. Tell me, Mrs. Blackthorne, how did you meet my old friend here?" The question was casual. The interest behind it was anything but. "In Black Hollow," Evelyn said, using the answer she'd rehearsed 100 times. "He was passing through, and we discovered we had compatible views on resource management." Cartwright's eyebrows rose. "Resource management? How wonderfully specific." "I find specificity prevents misunderstanding." Something that might have been amusement crossed the senator's face. "Indeed it does. Gideon, you've chosen an interesting companion." "I always do." They moved on before Cartwright could probe deeper, but Evelyn caught the look he exchanged with another man across the room. Information being filed away for later use. "You did well," Gideon murmured, "but they're going to dig deeper." "Let them dig." They entered the main ballroom and Evelyn's breath caught despite herself. The space was enormous, all polished wood and gilt trim and windows that stretched toward a ceiling painted with clouds and cherubs. An orchestra played from a raised platform, while hundreds of guests danced or clustered in groups, their conversations creating a hum that filled the air like distant thunder. This was power, real power, the kind that moved mountains and decided futures. And Evelyn was supposed to navigate it without drowning. "There's the governor." Gideon nodded toward a silver-haired man holding court near the orchestra. "We'll need to pay respects at some point." "What's he like?" "Smart. Political. He'll smile while calculating exactly how you're useful to him." Gideon accepted 2 glasses of champagne from a passing server. "Don't trust the smile." Before Evelyn could respond, a woman's voice cut through the ambient noise. "Gideon Blackthorne. As I live and breathe." The woman approaching was maybe 40, beautiful in a maintained way that spoke of money and effort. Her dress was cream silk with emerald accents, and she moved through the crowd like Moses parting the Red Sea. Margaret, Gideon's tone was carefully neutral. You look well. And you look married. Margaret's eyes locked onto Evelyn with laser focus. This must be the mysterious bride I've heard absolutely nothing about. Margaret Ashford, Evelyn Blackthorne. Gideon made the introduction smoothly. Margaret's family owns most of the copper mines in the Southern Territory. How fascinating. Margaret offered her hand with the limpness of someone used to having it kissed rather than shaken. Tell me everything, darling. How did you trap our most eligible bachelor? The question was dressed as playfulness, but the edge underneath was sharp enough to draw blood. I didn't trap anyone, Evelyn said, shaking Margaret's hand firmly. We made a mutually beneficial arrangement. Margaret's smile froze. How wonderfully romantic. Romance is overrated. Honesty lasts longer. For a moment, Margaret just stared. Then she laughed, high and brittle. Oh, Gideon, she's absolutely savage. I adore it. I thought you might. Though I do wonder, Margaret leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. What exactly does a girl from nowhere bring to a marriage with the Blackthorne Empire? There it was, the real question under all the pleasantries. Evelyn met Margaret's eyes without flinching. Perspective, and the ability to see through bullshit. Margaret's laugh this time was genuine. Oh, we're going to get along famously or hate each other completely. I haven't decided which yet. She drifted away, already targeting someone else. Gideon steered Evelyn toward the edge of the ballroom where they could breathe. Margaret's dangerous, he said quietly. She collects information like some people collect stamps. Is everyone here dangerous? Pretty much. He sipped his champagne. Welcome to Denver society. Over the next hour, they ran a gauntlet of introductions. Railroad investors who asked pointed questions about timber contracts. Mining executives who wanted to know Gideon's position on mineral rights. Society wives who examined Evelyn like she was a science experiment. Each conversation was a test. Each question had layers of meaning. Evelyn answered carefully, using the phrases Mrs. Dresden had drilled into her, while watching Gideon navigate the social battlefield with practiced ease. He was different here, still himself, but playing a role. The successful businessman, the respectable heir. Someone who belonged in rooms like this even though Evelyn suspected he hated every minute of it. Mr. and Mrs. Blackthorne. A new voice, smooth as oil. How delightful to finally meet. The man approaching was maybe 50, impeccably dressed, with eyes that calculated everything. Behind him came a woman in silver who looked bored with her own existence. Jonathan Prescott, Gideon said with forced politeness. Allow me to introduce my wife. Prescott's handshake was too firm, too long. Charmed. I've been dying to meet the woman who finally captured Blackthorne's attention. Not captured, Evelyn corrected. Married? Of course. Prescott's smile didn't reach his eyes. Though I must admit your background is something of a mystery. No one seems to know much about your family. That's because they're not important enough for people like you to care about. The words came out before Evelyn could stop them. Gideon went very still beside her. Prescott's expression didn't change, but something cold entered his gaze. How refreshingly honest. Most people try to inflate their credentials. I don't see the point in lying about who I am. How novel. He turned to Gideon. We should discuss the forestry contracts. I have investors interested in expanding operations significantly. We're not expanding that way. Not even for substantial capital injection? Not even then. Gideon's tone ended the discussion. The contracts stand as written. Prescott's jaw tightened. I see. Well, perhaps we'll revisit this conversation when you're less distracted. He left with his bored wife trailing behind. The moment they were out of earshot, Evelyn exhaled. That was bad, wasn't it? That was perfect, Gideon said. Prescott's been trying to force me into strip mining contracts for 3 years. He needed to know you won't be a weakness he can exploit. By insulting him? By being exactly who you are. He took her empty glass and replaced it with a fresh one. Stop trying to be what they expect. It's not working anyway. Before Evelyn could process that, music swelled and couples began moving toward the dance floor. Time to dance, Gideon said. Now? Everyone's watching. If we don't dance, they'll assume there's trouble. He offered his hand. Trust me. Evelyn took his hand and let him lead her onto the floor. Other couples swirled around them, all moving with practiced grace. She tried to remember everything she'd learned, all the steps and timing, and "Stop thinking," Gideon said, pulling her into position. "Just follow." The music began. A waltz, slow and elegant. Gideon led with the same confidence he'd shown during practice, and Evelyn fell into the rhythm they'd established over hours of training. Turn, step, glide, don't look at your feet. Around them, other dancers moved like a choreographed machine. Evelyn caught glimpses of faces watching. Margaret Ashford with calculating interest, Senator Cartwright nodding approval, Prescott with thinly veiled disdain, and Victoria, standing near the governor, her expression unreadable. "They're all staring," Evelyn murmured. "Let them." Gideon guided her through a spin. "You're doing fine." "I'm terrified." "I know. Keep dancing anyway." The waltz continued, and slowly Evelyn's terror transformed into something else. Not confidence exactly, but a kind of grim determination. She was here. She was dancing. She hadn't fallen on her face yet. When the music ended, applause rippled through the ballroom. Gideon bowed. Evelyn curtsied the way Catherine had taught her, and they returned to the edge of the floor. "Well done," a woman's voice said behind them. Evelyn turned to find an elegant woman in her 60s, wearing a gown of deep purple and carrying herself with natural authority. "Mrs. Blackthorne, may I introduce Governor Harrison's wife, Eleanor?" Gideon made the introduction with genuine respect. Eleanor's handshake was firm and warm. "I've been curious to meet you, dear. The rumor mill has been working overtime since your marriage was announced." "I'm sure it has," Evelyn said carefully. "Most of it complete nonsense, naturally." Eleanor's smile was kind. "I find the truth is usually more interesting than speculation. Tell me, what brought you to Colorado Territory?" It was a simple question with complicated implications. Evelyn chose honesty. "Necessity. My family needed help, and Gideon offered it." How wonderfully straightforward. Eleanor sipped her champagne. "Most young women would dress that up with romance and providence. I don't see the point in pretending this was anything but a business arrangement. Business arrangements built on honesty often outlast romantic ones built on lies." Eleanor glanced toward where Victoria stood talking with a cluster of board members. "And I suspect you'll need that honesty in the coming weeks." "Why?" Eleanor's expression turned knowing. "Because Victoria Blackthorne has been positioning herself as the family matriarch for a decade. Your existence threatens that position. She'll do everything in her power to remove you." "She's already tried." "The dress sabotage?" "Yes, I heard." Eleanor looked Evelyn up and down. "Though I must say, your mother-in-law's burgundy suits you better than anything new would have. She had excellent taste." "You knew her?" "We were friends. Emily Blackthorne was one of the few genuine people in Denver society." Sadness crossed Eleanor's face. "She would have liked you, I think. You have her spine." The governor himself appeared before Evelyn could respond. Robert Harrison was shorter than expected, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he took her hand, "my wife speaks highly of you, which is rare. She usually finds young society wives insufferable." "I'm not a society wife," Evelyn said. "I'm just married." Harrison laughed. "Direct, I appreciate that. Tell me, what's your view on territorial expansion?" The question caught Evelyn off guard. "In what sense?" "Railroad development, mining operations, opening frontier land for settlement." He watched her carefully. "Your husband has strong opinions. I'm curious if you share them." Evelyn glanced at Gideon, who gave the smallest nod. "Permission to speak freely. I grew up in a mining town," she said slowly. "Watched a company strip the mountain, work men to death, and abandon the town when the silver ran out. So my view is that expansion without responsibility just leaves corpses in ghost towns." Silence spread around them like ripples on water. Nearby conversations stopped. People turned to listen. Harrison's eyebrows rose. "That's a harsh assessment." "That's an honest one. I've seen what happens when profit matters more than people." Evelyn met his eyes. "The territory can expand, but if we're just repeating the same mistakes faster, what's the point?" More silence. Evelyn realized half the ballroom was listening now. Then Harrison smiled. Gideon, your wife is either very brave or very foolish. Both, Gideon said. That's why I married her. I like her. Harrison turned to Eleanor. We should have them to dinner. I want to hear more about Black Hollow. I'll arrange it, Eleanor said. They moved on, and suddenly Evelyn could breathe again. Around her, conversations resumed, but the quality had changed. People looked at her differently, some with respect, some with hostility, all with increased interest. That was either brilliant or catastrophic, Gideon murmured. We'll know which when Victoria makes her move. The move came 20 minutes later. Victoria approached with 3 men in tow, all board members, all looking grim. Gideon, we need to speak. Victoria's tone allowed no argument. The board has concerns about certain developments. Then the board can schedule a formal meeting. This can't wait. The oldest board member, a man named Thaddeus with white hair and judgmental eyes, stepped forward. Your marriage has created complications that affect company stability. My marriage is none of the board's business. It becomes our business when it threatens investor confidence. Thaddeus pulled papers from his jacket. We've received inquiries from Eastern investors expressing concern about the Blackthorne family's judgment. Expressing concern? Gideon repeated flatly. Or being encouraged to express concern. Victoria's expression didn't change. The source is irrelevant. What matters is that confidence is wavering. What matters, Gideon said with dangerous calm, is that you're trying to force an annulment at a social event instead of through proper channels. We're trying to protect the company you claim to care about. Thaddeus thrust the papers toward Evelyn. Mrs. Blackthorne, these documents outline a generous settlement. Sign them, and you'll be compensated beyond your wildest expectations. Evelyn took the papers, scanning them quickly. Legalese disguised as generosity, but the meaning was clear. Sign away the marriage, take the money, disappear. No, she said. Thaddeus blinked. I beg your pardon? I said no. Evelyn handed the papers back. You can keep your settlement. Young woman, you don't understand what you're refusing. I understand perfectly. You want me gone because I'm not who you expected, because I don't fit your plans. She looked at Victoria. Because she can't control me. Victoria's smile was ice. This isn't about control. It's about protecting the Blackthorne legacy from inappropriate influences. Inappropriate? Evelyn laughed without humor. You mean poor, working class, someone who actually knows what your forestry operations do to the people living in timber towns. Careful, Victoria warned. Or what? You'll ruin me? Evelyn felt her temper rising, felt all the careful control she'd maintained starting to crack. I came from nothing. You can't threaten me with going back to nothing. We can threaten your family, Thaddeus said coldly. The debts that were paid could be called back. The arrangements made could be unmade. The threat landed like a physical blow. Gideon moved before Evelyn could respond, stepping between her and the board members with barely controlled fury. Touch her family and I'll burn this company to the ground before I let you have it. Gideon, Victoria started. No, you've crossed a line. His voice dropped to something lethal. I rebuilt this company from the ashes my father left. I made it profitable. I made it respectable. And I did it without your help or your permission. You did it with board capital, Thaddeus countered, which I've repaid 10 times over. You want to fight? Let's have it. Call a formal board meeting. Present your case. But if you threaten my wife or her family again, I'll make it my life's work to destroy every business interest you have. The standoff drew attention. Nearby guests pretended not to watch while watching intently. This was exactly the kind of drama Denver society fed on. Eleanor Harrison appeared at Evelyn's elbow like a guardian angel. Gentlemen, perhaps this discussion would be better suited to a private setting. Stay out of this, Eleanor, Victoria said. I don't think I will. Eleanor's tone was pleasant steel. You're making a scene at my husband's reception. That's remarkably poor form. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she recognized defeat when she saw it. We'll continue this conversation later. Looking forward to it, Gideon said. The board members retreated with Victoria, leaving Evelyn shaking with adrenaline and anger. Come with me, Eleanor said quietly. You need a moment away from vultures. She led Evelyn through a side door into a smaller parlor where the noise of the ballroom became muted background. Another woman waited there, younger, with kind eyes. "This is my daughter, Sarah." Eleanor poured water from a crystal pitcher. "Sit down before you fall down." Evelyn sat, accepting the water with trembling hands. "I made it worse." "You made it honest," Sarah said, "which is the same thing in rooms like this." "They threatened my family." "Empty threat," Eleanor said firmly. "Robert would never allow debts to be weaponized that way. It's illegal and he knows it." Victoria doesn't seem to care about legality. Victoria cares deeply about appearance. Eleanor sat across from her. "Which is why threatening you publicly was a mistake. She showed her hand too early." Evelyn tried to process that through the fog of anger. "What do you mean?" "She wanted you to break, to sign those papers in front of witnesses, proving you were just after money." Sarah leaned forward. "But you didn't. You stood your ground and made them look like bullies." "I still don't belong here. Neither do most of these people," Eleanor said dryly. "Half of them are one generation from poverty. They've just gotten better at hiding it." The door opened and Gideon entered, his expression still dark with anger. "Are you all right?" "Fine." "You're not fine. They threatened—" "I heard what they threatened." Evelyn stood, feeling steadier. "And I heard what you said back. I meant it, every word." Eleanor stood as well. "I think it's time for you both to make another appearance. Show the room you're unshaken." "I don't feel unshaken." "Then fake it," Sarah said. "That's what everyone else is doing." They returned to the ballroom together. The music had resumed, conversations flowed. On the surface, everything looked normal, but Evelyn could feel the shift in the room's attention. People watched with increased interest. Whispers followed in their wake. The confrontation had changed things. Margaret Ashford intercepted them near the refreshment table. "Well, that was entertaining." "Glad we could provide amusement," Gideon said coldly. "Oh, don't be cross." Victoria overplayed her hand spectacularly. Margaret sipped champagne. "The betting pools are now split on whether you'll survive this or crash magnificently." "There are betting pools?" "Darling, there are always betting pools." Margaret's expression turned serious. "For what it's worth, I'm betting on you. Victoria's getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." "She's already made several," Evelyn said. "Then capitalize on them." Margaret glanced across the room to where Victoria held court with remaining board members. "You have something she doesn't. The governor's wife likes you. That matters more than you think." "Why does it matter?" "Because Robert Harrison controls territorial appointments, land grants, and business licenses, and Eleanor controls Robert." Margaret smiled. "Welcome to how power actually works." She drifted away, leaving Evelyn with yet another layer of complexity to process. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. More introductions, more careful conversations, more dancing to prove they were fine. Evelyn's feet ached. Her face hurt from smiling. Her brain felt like it had been through a meat grinder. But she stayed upright. Finally, mercifully, the event began winding down. Guests departed in clusters. The orchestra packed up. Servants started clearing glasses and plates. Victoria found them as they prepared to leave. "This isn't over." "No," Gideon agreed. "It's not. But it's not going the way you planned either." "We'll see." Victoria's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "You think you've won something tonight, but you've only made things harder for yourself." "Good," Evelyn said. "I prefer earning what I get." Victoria's expression flickered with something that might have been respect, or might have been pure hatred. Hard to tell. They left the mansion and climbed into their carriage. The moment the door closed, Evelyn sagged against the seat. "I feel like I've been in a bar fight," she said. "You basically have been." Gideon loosened his collar. "How are you really?" "Angry, scared, exhausted." She looked at him. "Did I ruin everything?" "You saved everything. They expected you to fold. You didn't." "I told the governor his expansion policies create ghost towns." "He already knows that. You just said it out loud." Gideon smiled slightly. "Eleanor Harrison requesting dinner means you passed her test. That's huge." "What about the board?" "The board's a problem, but it was always going to be a problem." He reached across and took her hand. "You did well tonight." "Better than well?" Evelyn looked at their joined hands. Somewhere over the past few weeks, this had stopped being purely business. She wasn't sure when that shift had happened, but it was real. What happens now? She asked. Now we prepare for the board meeting. They'll make their formal challenge, and we'll fight it. How? By proving you're not a liability, by showing you provide value to the company and the family. His grip tightened. And by making sure Victoria knows she can't win this. The carriage rolled through Denver's dark streets. Evelyn watched the city pass, thinking about Victoria's threats and Eleanor's kindness and the strange battlefield she'd somehow survived. Gideon? Yeah? Thank you for standing up for my family. They're my family now, too. He said it simply, like it was obvious. That's what marriage means. Even a business arrangement? Even that. They rode in silence for a while. Then Evelyn squeezed his hand once before letting go. I'm not giving up, she said. I know. Victoria's going to try again. Absolutely. And the board's going to make this as difficult as possible. Without question. Gideon looked at her in the dim carriage light. But you're still here, still fighting. That's all I need. The hotel appeared ahead, lit against the night. Their rooms waited. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new challenges, new people trying to break them apart. But tonight, they'd survived. And sometimes survival was victory enough. The board meeting was scheduled for 3 days after the reception. 3 days of Gideon locked in his hotel suite with lawyers and accountants, preparing arguments and documentation. 3 days of Evelyn pacing her room, feeling useless, while the battle for her marriage happened in legal language she barely understood. On the second day, Eleanor Harrison sent an invitation to lunch. They met at a restaurant overlooking the city, all white tablecloths and hushed conversations. Eleanor was already seated when Evelyn arrived, looking elegant in navy blue. Thank you for coming, Eleanor said. I imagine you're going mad with nothing to do but worry. Is it that obvious? You have the look of a caged animal. Eleanor poured tea. I remember that feeling. When Robert first ran for governor, I spent months waiting while men in closed rooms decided our future. How did you handle it? Badly at first. Then I realized waiting wasn't the same as being powerless. Eleanor added sugar to her tea. There are things you can do, moves you can make that don't require lawyers. Evelyn leaned forward. I'm listening. The board meeting will focus on whether you're a liability to the company. Victoria will present evidence of your unsuitability. Gideon will counter with legal arguments about marriage rights and company charter interpretation. Eleanor met her eyes. But there's a clause in the charter that could change everything. Do you know about it? Gideon mentioned something about marriage providing public service. Exactly. If you can demonstrate meaningful contribution to the territory's welfare, the marriage becomes protected regardless of the board's opinion. Eleanor pulled papers from her bag. I've been researching your mining town. Black Hollow, correct? Yes. It's not the only town the mining companies abandoned. There are dozens across the territory. Ghost towns, dying communities, people left with nothing. Eleanor spread the papers across the table. What if you became their advocate? Evelyn stared at the documents. Maps showing abandoned settlements. Reports on company negligence. Statistics on worker deaths and town collapses. I don't understand. Robert's been trying to pass legislation requiring companies to maintain basic infrastructure in resource towns. Safety regulations. Medical facilities. Transition support when operations close. Eleanor tapped the papers. But he needs public support. Someone who can speak from experience about what happens when companies prioritize profit over people. You want me to testify? I want you to lead a territorial commission on resource community welfare. Robert will appoint you officially, giving you authority to investigate conditions and propose solutions. Eleanor's expression turned fierce. It's real work, important work, and it makes you invaluable to the territory's future. Evelyn's hand shook as she picked up the reports. Stories that could have been Black Hollow, could have been her family. When would this start? Immediately. Before the board meeting, so it's already established fact rather than desperate maneuver. Eleanor smiled. Victoria can't argue you're a liability if you're actively serving the territory's interests. She'll say it's a setup. Of course she will. But the work will be real. The problems are real. And your qualifications are better than anyone else Robert could appoint. Eleanor leaned back. The question is whether you're willing to do it. Evelyn thought about Samuel's letter, about her father finally getting medicine, about Margaret eating full meals, about all the other families in all the other dying towns who didn't have someone willing to sell themselves for survival. What do I need to do? Eleanor's smile widened. First, we visit the territorial offices. Then we make sure everyone knows about it before Victoria can spin the story. By evening, Evelyn had been officially appointed to the Territorial Commission on Resource Community Welfare. The announcement went out through government channels and newspapers simultaneously. By the time Gideon returned to the hotel, the story was already spreading. He found Evelyn in her room, surrounded by reports and maps. "What did you do?" He didn't sound angry, just amazed. "Eleanor offered me a position. I took it." Evelyn looked up from a particularly damning report about a copper town in the Southern Territory. "Is that going to cause problems?" "Problems for Victoria." Gideon picked up one of the maps, scanning it. "This is brilliant. She can't claim you're unsuitable when you're serving in an official territorial capacity. It's not just strategy. The work is real." "I know." He set the map down carefully. "My mother tried to do something similar. She wanted to establish medical clinics in timber towns. My father shut it down, said it was too expensive and bad for business." "Was it bad for business?" "Probably. Workers with access to doctors live longer and complain more about safety conditions." His expression hardened. "My father hated both those things." Evelyn stood, moving to the window. Denver spread below, all electric lights and wealth built on the backs of people nobody in this city thought about. "I'm going to actually do this work," she said, "not just use it to win a board meeting." "I know that too." Gideon joined her at the window. "The board meeting's tomorrow. Are you ready?" "I don't think ready applies to this situation." "Fair point." They stood in silence, watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably planning her next attack. The board members were preparing their arguments. Legal battles were taking shape. But for this moment, standing by the window with Gideon, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt since leaving Black Hollow. Purpose. The board meeting took place in a conference room that smelled like old money and older grudges. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, a long table that could seat 20 but held only the essential players. Victoria sat at one end with Thaddeus and two other board members. Gideon sat opposite with his lawyers. Evelyn was placed to the side, technically an observer, but really the defendant in a trial that wasn't supposed to be a trial. Marcus stood by the door, officially security, but really moral support. He'd insisted on coming, and Evelyn was grateful for the familiar face. "Let's begin." Thaddeus opened a leather folder. "We're here to discuss the validity of Gideon Blackthorne's marriage under Company Charter Section 12, subsection 4, which states that marriages affecting company stability may be challenged by board vote." "Challenged," one of Gideon's lawyers interjected, "not invalidated. The burden of proof lies with the board to demonstrate actual harm to company operations." "Which we're prepared to do." Victoria pulled out her own documents. "Since this marriage was announced, we've received inquiries from Eastern investors expressing concern. 3 existing contracts have been questioned. Denver society has been scandalized by the circumstances." "Scandalized," Evelyn said before she could stop herself. "Or gossiping, because there's a difference." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "The distinction is irrelevant. What matters is perception." "Actually," another voice said from the doorway, "what matters is legal compliance." Everyone turned. Governor Harrison stood there with Eleanor beside him, both looking official enough to make the board members sit up straighter. "Governor," Thaddeus stood quickly, "we weren't expecting—" "Clearly," Harrison entered without waiting for invitation. "Eleanor mentioned you were having this meeting. I thought I should attend since it involves one of my territorial appointees." Victoria's face went very still. "Appointee?" "Mrs. Blackthorne has accepted a position on the commission investigating resource community welfare. Quite an important role." Harrison took a seat. "Please, continue your discussion about whether her marriage is valid. I'm fascinated to hear how that impacts her ability to serve the territory." The room went silent. Evelyn watched Victoria process this development, saw the moment she realized the trap had sprung. "The appointment is very recent," Victoria said carefully. "One might question the timing." "One might," Harrison agreed, "just as one might question the timing of this board challenge immediately following a successful social introduction at my reception. With respect, Governor, this is a private company matter." Not when it involves territorial appointees. Harrison's tone remained pleasant, but steel ran underneath. If you challenge Mrs. Blackthorn's suitability, you're effectively challenging my judgment in appointing her. I hope you're prepared to defend that position publicly. Thaddeus exchanged glances with the other board members. This was politics beyond their usual playing field. Perhaps, he said slowly, we've been hasty. If Mrs. Blackthorn is serving the territory in an official capacity, she is, Eleanor confirmed, starting immediately. We have communities in desperate need of her perspective and experience. Then perhaps accommodation can be reached. Thaddeus looked at Victoria, who sat rigid with barely controlled fury. Mrs. Blackthorn's position changes the calculation somewhat. It changes nothing, Victoria said flatly. She's still fundamentally unsuitable for what? Harrison interrupted. For having grown up poor? For understanding what resource extraction does to communities? For speaking truth to power even when it's uncomfortable? He leaned forward. Because those are exactly the qualities I need in someone investigating corporate negligence. This is manipulation, Victoria said, a convenient appointment designed to circumvent legitimate concerns. Or, Evelyn said quietly, it's recognition that people from places like Black Hollow might actually have something valuable to contribute. Victoria turned her glare on Evelyn. You think one appointment changes who you are? Where you came from? No. I know exactly who I am and where I came from. Evelyn stood, tired of being talked about like she wasn't in the room. I came from a town your mining partners destroyed and abandoned, from a family that almost starved because companies decided profit mattered more than people. And yes, I married Gideon to save them. I'm not ashamed of that. You should be. Why? Because I chose survival over pride? Because I made a hard choice when there were no good options? Evelyn moved around the table, forcing Victoria to actually look at her. You sit in rooms like this deciding who's suitable and who isn't, who belongs and who doesn't. But you've never had to choose between watching your family die and selling yourself to a stranger. You've never had to be desperate. I've built this family's reputation. You've built walls. Evelyn cut her off. Walls to keep out anyone who doesn't meet your standards. But those walls don't protect the company. They just make you feel powerful. Victoria stood, fury breaking through her controlled facade. How dare you? How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that your approved candidates were all people you could control? Evelyn felt years of suppressed anger rising. You didn't want Gideon to marry someone suitable. You wanted him to marry someone beholden to you. That's not a... It's exactly true. Gideon's voice cut through the tension. You've been trying to control this company through marriage alliances since my father died. But I rebuilt it without your help, and I'll keep it running without your approval. Thaddeus cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a recess. No. Victoria's hands shook as she gathered her documents. I want to vote, now, on whether this marriage violates company stability provisions. Fine, Gideon nodded to his lawyers. Call the vote. Thaddeus looked uncomfortable. Given the governor's presence and Mrs. Blackthorn's territorial appointment, I'm not sure. I said call the vote. Silence stretched. Then Thaddeus sighed. All in favor of challenging the marriage as violation of company charter. Victoria's hand went up immediately. One other board member raised his hand hesitantly. Opposed? 3 hands rose, including Thaddeus himself. The challenge fails, Thaddeus announced. The marriage stands as legal and valid under company charter. Victoria's face went white, then red, then very carefully blank. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, Gideon replied. It is. Victoria gathered her things with shaking hands and left without another word. The board member who'd voted with her followed quickly. The others lingered, looking relieved the ordeal was finished. Harrison stood. Glad that's settled. Evelyn, I'll need you in my office tomorrow morning to discuss the commission's priorities. I'll be there. Good, he nodded to Gideon. Your wife is remarkable. Don't screw this up. Wasn't planning on it. The Harrisons left, taking the remaining board members with them. Within minutes, only Evelyn, Gideon, Marcus, and the lawyers remained. One of the lawyers began packing documents. Well, that went better than expected. Because Eleanor Harrison is terrifying when properly motivated, the other lawyer added. Congratulations, Mrs. Blackthorne. You survived Victoria. They departed, leaving just the three of them in the conference room. Marcus grinned. That was the most entertainment I've had in years. Glad we could provide a show, Evelyn said, suddenly exhausted. You did more than that, ma'am. You won. Marcus headed for the door. I'll give you two some privacy. When he was gone, Gideon moved to the window overlooking Denver. I meant what I said, about rebuilding without her approval. I know. This commission work, it's going to be hard. You'll see things that'll make Black Hollow look gentle. I can handle it. I know that too. He turned to face her. When this started, I thought I needed someone who could survive being my wife. I was wrong. Evelyn's chest tightened. Wrong how? I needed someone who could be more than that. Someone who could actually make a difference. He crossed to where she stood. You didn't just survive Victoria. You beat her by being exactly who you are. A stubborn frontier girl with a mouth that gets her in trouble? A woman who refuses to be anything less than honest. His hand found hers. I didn't expect that. Didn't expect you. The room felt smaller suddenly, warmer. This wasn't supposed to be real, Evelyn said quietly. I know. It was just business, an arrangement. I know that too. But somewhere between Black Hollow and here, it became something else. Gideon's thumb traced circles on her palm. Yeah, it did. They stood there, hands joined, while Denver hummed below and the future stretched ahead with possibilities neither had planned for. So what now? Evelyn asked. Now we go back to Ironcrest. You do your commission work. I run the company. We figure out what this marriage actually is when it's not under attack. He smiled slightly. Sound acceptable? Sounds terrifying. Good. Means it's real. They left Denver the next morning after Evelyn's meeting with Harrison. The commission work was extensive, requiring travel to damaged communities and documentation of corporate negligence. It would take months, maybe years, but it was work that mattered. The journey back to Ironcrest felt different from the journey out, lighter somehow, despite the responsibilities waiting. When they crossed the pass into the valley, Evelyn saw workers in the fields waving. Word had spread about the board meeting, about Victoria's defeat, about the commission appointment. The lodge appeared ahead, warm lights in windows, smoke from chimneys. Home, in a way Black Hollow had stopped being months ago. Catherine met them at the door. Welcome back, Mrs. Blackthorne. The staff has been waiting to congratulate you. Inside, people had assembled. Mill workers, household staff, security personnel. They applauded when Evelyn entered, and she felt tears threatening. Marcus stepped forward. We're proud of you, ma'am. You showed them what frontier people are made of. I just told the truth. Sometimes that's the bravest thing you can do. The celebration lasted into evening. Simple food, local whiskey, people who'd stopped being strangers and become something like family. Later, Evelyn stood on the lodge's front porch watching stars emerge over the mountains. The air was cold and clean, nothing like Denver's coal smoke. Gideon joined her, offering a blanket. Tired? Exhausted, but good exhausted. The commission work starts next week. You sure you're ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. She pulled the blanket tighter. I keep thinking about all the towns like Black Hollow, all the families waiting for mines to reopen or companies to care. Maybe I can actually help. You will help. I've seen you survive impossible situations. You'll do the same for them. Evelyn looked at him, this man who'd offered her survival and given her purpose instead. Why did you really choose me? The truth this time. Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Because when I saw you in Black Hollow, you reminded me of my mother, the way she fought for things that mattered even when my father told her to stop, the way she refused to be less than herself just to make things easier. He met her eyes. I needed that. Someone who wouldn't compromise just because it was convenient. Your mother sounds remarkable. She was. You would have liked each other. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the valley settle into night. Below, lights flickered in worker housing. The mill stood dark, waiting for tomorrow. Life continued the way it always did, one day after another. Gideon? Yeah? Thank you for everything. You've said that before. I mean it more now. He smiled and pulled her closer, and Evelyn let herself lean against him. Not because she needed the support, but because she wanted it. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Evelyn traveled to resource communities, documenting conditions and interviewing workers. She saw copper towns where poisoned water ran orange, timber settlements where company housing collapsed from neglect, mining operations where men worked without safety equipment because complaining meant losing jobs they couldn't afford to lose. She wrote reports that made territorial legislators uncomfortable, testified at hearings where corporate lawyers tried to discredit her, pushed for regulations that companies fought tooth and nail. It was exhausting, frustrating work. It was also the most important thing she'd ever done. Between trips, she returned to Ironcrest. Gideon was there, running the company with the same intensity she brought to the commission. They'd started having dinner together, talking about their work, their frustrations, the small victories that kept them going. Somewhere in those dinners, the marriage stopped being an arrangement and became a partnership. Not perfect. They fought sometimes, usually about Evelyn taking risks in hostile communities or Gideon working himself to exhaustion. But they fought as equals, and that made all the difference. 6 months after the board meeting, legislation passed requiring companies to maintain basic infrastructure in resource towns. Medical facilities, safe housing, transition support when operations closed. It wasn't everything Evelyn wanted, but it was progress. Governor Harrison held a signing ceremony where he publicly credited Evelyn's commission work for making the legislation possible. Newspapers ran stories about the frontier woman who'd taken on corporate interests and won. Victoria sent a letter. Evelyn almost threw it away unread, but curiosity won. The message was brief. "You've proven more formidable than anticipated. I underestimated you. It won't happen again." Not quite an apology, but close enough to acknowledgement. Evelyn filed it away and moved on to the next town that needed help. A year after leaving Black Hollow, Evelyn returned for the first time. The town looked different. The cabin still stood, better maintained than before. The general store had reopened under new ownership. A small medical clinic operated from what used to be the assay office. Her father had died 4 months earlier, peacefully in his sleep with Samuel and Margaret beside him. Evelyn had come back for the funeral, but this visit was different. This was checking on the living. Samuel met her at the cabin, taller than she remembered. 15 now, almost a man. "Evie," he hugged her hard, "you look different." Good different or bad different? Rich different, but still you underneath. Margaret appeared from inside, healthier than Evelyn had ever seen her. The cough was gone. Color had returned to her cheeks. "Did you really tell the governor his policies were creating ghost towns?" Margaret asked. "Someone had to. Everyone in Black Hollow talks about it, about how you left here and became important." "I'm not important. I just got loud about things that mattered." They spent the afternoon catching up. Samuel was apprenticing with a carpenter in the next town over. Margaret attended the new school that had opened when the territory started requiring education funding. Both had futures now, real ones, because Evelyn had been desperate enough to trade herself for their survival. Before leaving, Evelyn stood in the cabin one last time, the place where she'd made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. "You did good, Evie," Samuel said from the doorway. "Papa would be proud." "I hope so." "Are you happy with him?" Evelyn thought about Gideon waiting back at Ironcrest, about partnership built from necessity and transformed into something real, about work that mattered and a life she'd never planned but somehow found anyway. "Yeah," she said. "I think I am." The journey back to Ironcrest took 3 days. When the valley appeared ahead, Evelyn felt something in her chest ease. Home. Strange how quickly that had happened. Gideon met her at the lodge. "How was it?" "Hard. Good. They're okay." "And you?" "I'm okay too." He pulled her close and she let herself sink into the embrace, not because she needed rescue, but because being held by someone who saw her as an equal felt like the greatest luxury she'd never known to want. "I love you," Gideon said against her hair. "Probably should have mentioned that before now." Evelyn laughed. "Terrible timing, as always. Is that a yes?" "That's a I love you too, you impossible man." They stood there while the valley buzzed around them, workers heading home, the mill closing down for the evening, life continuing its endless rhythm. 2 years later, Evelyn stood in a meeting hall in Denver, presenting the Commission's comprehensive report on resource community welfare. Recommendations filled 200 pages. Implementation would take years. Corporate interests were already mobilizing opposition. But the work was documented, the problems were visible, and enough legislators had been convinced that change was possible. After the presentation, Eleanor Harrison found her in the hallway. Remarkable work. Robert's already drafting the next phase of legislation. The companies will fight it. Of course they will, but they'll lose eventually. You've made it impossible to ignore what they've been doing. Eleanor smiled. Emily Blackthorne would be proud. You've done what she tried to do. I had help she didn't have. You had a husband who supported you instead of blocking you. That makes all the difference. That evening, Evelyn and Gideon had dinner with the Harrisons at the governor's mansion. The same ballroom where Victoria had tried to destroy her was now hosting a celebration of the commission's achievements. Different context, same room, proof that spaces could be transformed by the people who occupied them. To Evelyn, Harrison toasted, who proved that frontier women are the most dangerous political force in the territory. Dangerous in a good way, Eleanor added. They laughed and drank expensive wine and discussed plans for the future. More towns to investigate, more regulations to propose, more fights to pick with companies that thought profit excused negligence. Later, standing on the mansion's balcony overlooking Denver, Evelyn thought about the terrified girl who'd climbed into a stranger's wagon to save her family. She'd thought she was sacrificing her future. Instead, she'd found one bigger than anything she'd imagined. Not because of rescue or wealth or marriage to someone powerful, but because desperation had forced her into situations where her voice mattered, and she'd refused to make that voice quiet or acceptable or anything less than honest. "What are you thinking about?" Gideon asked, joining her at the railing. "About how nothing turned out the way I expected. Better or worse? Different. Harder in some ways, better in others." She turned to face him. "I'm glad you showed up in Black Hollow. Even though I lied about my name. Even though." The lying led somewhere true eventually. He kissed her, and Evelyn kissed back. And somewhere in the distance, Denver hummed with all its complexity and compromise and endless potential for both cruelty and change. 5 years after leaving Black Hollow, Ironcrest Lodge had transformed into something neither Evelyn nor Gideon had planned. The timber operations still ran, but alongside them now sat a training center for workers from resource communities, medical facilities that served surrounding settlements, a school where children from logging camps learned skills beyond what their parents' generation had access to. The company was still profitable, but profit served a larger purpose now. Evelyn's commission work had expanded beyond Colorado territory. Other regions wanted similar investigations. She traveled constantly, fought corporate lawyers regularly, and accumulated both admirers and enemies in equal measure. She thrived on it. On a cold winter evening, she returned from a particularly brutal 3-week trip to find Gideon waiting on the porch with news. "Victoria died," he said without preamble. "Heart attack, quick." Evelyn absorbed that. "How do you feel?" "Complicated." He handed her whiskey. "She made my life hell for years, but she also kept the company alive when my father was destroying it. People can be both terrible and necessary." "Yeah." He looked out at the valley. Her will left everything to charity, workers' relief funds mostly, like she was trying to fix things at the end. Maybe she was. They stood in silence, honoring a complicated woman who'd fought them viciously and still managed to do some good in the end. Life was like that, messy, contradictory, full of people who were never purely good or evil but some mixture of both, doing their best with the understanding they had. Years continued to pass. Samuel married and started his own carpentry business. Margaret became a teacher, working with children in resource communities. Both visited Ironcrest regularly, their futures secure in ways that had once seemed impossible. Evelyn's work evolved. She trained others to do the investigation and advocacy she'd started, multiplying the impact beyond what one person could achieve. The legislation she'd fought for became standard across Western territories. Not perfect, but better than what came before. The marriage that had begun as desperate transaction had deepened into something that sustained them both. Partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and the kind of honesty that only came from people who'd seen each other at their worst and chose to stay anyway. On their 10th anniversary, Gideon gave Evelyn a gift. "It's not much," he said, handing her a simple wooden box. Inside was the first contract they'd signed in Black Hollow, the business arrangement that had started everything. I thought about burning it, Gideon said. But then I realized it's part of our story, the foundation we built everything else on. Evelyn traced the signatures. Her handwriting had been shaky, desperate. His had been confident, certain. Both had changed since then. We've come a long way from this, she said. We have. But I'm glad it happened. Glad you were desperate enough to say yes. Glad you were stubborn enough to choose someone who'd fight you. They stood together in the lodge that had become home, surrounded by evidence of work that mattered and lives that had been changed. Not perfect. Never perfect. But real and hard-won and theirs. Outside, the valley that had once been just a timber operation now buzzed with schools and medical clinics and training centers. Proof that business could serve more than profit, that companies could exist without destroying the communities they operated in. Proof that one desperate choice could ripple into decades of change. Evelyn thought about the girl who'd sold herself to save her family, who'd walked into ballrooms full of people who wanted her to fail, who'd stood in front of legislators and corporate lawyers and refused to shut up about things that mattered. That girl was still inside her, still scared sometimes, still angry at systems designed to crush people like her family. But she'd learned something important in the years between Black Hollow and here. Desperation could be transformed into power if you refused to let it break you. Survival could become purpose if you looked beyond just staying alive. And sometimes the worst choices led to the best futures. Not because they were easy, but because they forced you to become someone capable of fighting for more than just yourself. The mountains stood eternal around Iron Crest Valley, and the timber operations continued their careful work. And the schools taught another generation of children that they didn't have to accept the futures their circumstances seemed to decree. And Evelyn Blackthorne, who'd once been Evelyn Hart from a dying mining town, stood on her porch and looked at everything they'd built and knew that sacrifice without surrender was its own kind of victory. Not the fairy tale ending people told in stories, but something better, something real.